Hi again then guys, and welcome to yet another Le Mans Tunes setup, and in particular this is a tribute to, for those who didn't know perhaps, the Le Mans. Yesterday, Toyota of course had their first victory in the Le Mans 24-hour race, so congratulations to them. They are now the second Japanese manufacturer to win. Personally, I would have liked it if Mazda was still the only one to win with the 787B back in '91, but be that as it may, there's been a little bit of controversy from some fans saying there wasn't enough competition for it to feel like a deserved win. Well, be that as it may, that's open for discussion. Winning the race, or even completing the race in its own right, is a feat, let alone actually winning, so congratulations to them. So this tune is a tribute to Toyota, but also, of course, in the same vein as my other Le Mans prototype tunes, be it LMP1s, Group Cs, whatever the case may be. Now, aside from the fact that it's a Toyota, which is a pretty obvious tribute to do right now, you're probably wondering, why would you do this kind of tune for this kind of car? Because it's so much slower than, for instance, the R92, the Sauber C9, the Peugeot 908. What is the point? Surely it's not fast enough. Well, on one hand, you are not wrong. But the reason why I'm driving it and tuning it for the Le Mans is simply because that's the track that I use to tune these cars up on. So it's basically just a good gauge of how it compares. The reality is I wouldn't necessarily recommend using the car on the track at all. Certainly not against those rivals, unless you're just going up against stuff like the Porsche 919. Now, this tune can be used not just at Le Mans, but a variety of places. And with the all-wheel drive, it's great through technical circuits as well. This just gives you the top speed when you actually do need it. So, I've dropped the weight, but as with all of these tunes, it is balancer performance friendly, so you don't have to drop the weight. It just makes an improvement, of course. As far as tyres, we've got racing hards on it. I would recommend turning traction control off, which of course I always do, but for those who are less experienced, you might want to actually try it turned off as well anyway, because the all-wheel drive makes a huge difference, out of corners especially. It's not that you can't spin out, it's just a lot more controlled. As far as the suspension, we've got the ride height on 90 and 70, the frequency on 4, anti-roll I've evened out to 5, compression on the dampers to 56 with 85 on the rebound, neutral camber and toe, certainly on a car that has all-wheel drive anyway. Downforce we've got as low as possible, obviously for top-end speed, and that will depend on the driver and especially on the track. If you're taking it on a very technical circuit, for instance, then you might want to increase that, of course. As far as the diff, I've gone for the lowest initial torque. Then as far as both acceleration and braking, as you can see, I've gone halfway. You could change that up, of course, if you already know a setup that you prefer, or if you'd like to just basically mess around, see what works better for you. Of course, feel free to do that. And as far as the gearbox, finally, as you can see from the specs, it's actually very strong for both top speed and acceleration, a 9.2 and a 9.7. And the way that we've done that is with an auto setting of 224, then individual gears of first as high as possible for acceleration off the line and launch. Again, the all-wheel drive helps a lot with that. Second gear 2150, then 1.6, 1.3, 1122, which is all the way to the left, and then for sixth gear I've got 0.890. So basically, first through fifth gear all give you great acceleration. Then sixth gear is super long, as you can see from the graph itself, so the acceleration becomes slower, but it gives you that top speed, especially with draft, when you need it. So you can tuck in behind a car like a Porsche 919 or an Audi R18, whatever the case may be, and use that sixth gear to get right up on their backside and potentially overtake them as well with 225 miles per hour of potential under its own power. So of course with slipstream you can go a little bit higher. Now speaking of that slipstream, you will find that you top out, because you're very close to the red line, at maybe in the region of 230, perhaps just over or just under. So if you need it to do more than that with slipstream, then you might want to drop sixth gear a little bit more, or the final drive, which as you can see is on 3350. So adjust that as and when necessary, especially depending on the kind of cars that you're up against. But that's it for the tune. Now of course you want to know, what kind of lap can this car do? Well, actually, the kind of lap that this car can do is not bad at all. It can run just over, as you'll see towards the end of the video, just over 3 minutes. Now, of course, that's nowhere near, say, the 246 laps that I can do in my Audi R18 or the Mazda LM55. Of course, it's not going to be as quick as those. You've got nowhere near that kind of power, which is kind of a shame. It would be cool to see what this could do with that. If it did have that kind of power, it could probably go maybe 250, 260, something more like that. The Toyota isn't quite as strong as, for instance, the Porsche, or I believe the Audi R18 is also a little bit quicker as well. I'm referring, of course, to the newer R18. And as you can see, just as a side point, we've got a little livery tribute to another car that ran in the Le Mans, the Rebellion TVR, which I think is a pretty cool looking car as well. Now, as far as how it performs and how you should use this car, it's very forgiving. Super beginner friendly. 225 miles per hour is more than enough for this car under most circumstances, especially with the kind of cars you'll be taking it up against, because I don't think many people will be trying to beat, Sauber C9s or XJR9s with it. Although, with the slipstream potential, especially on the track with the chicanes, you'd be surprised how closely it can keep up with some of them. For instance, the Group C cars can run just under 3 minutes, whereas this is just over. So it's not too bad, and if you are more skilled than your opponents, you might actually be able to beat some of those guys, because it's so good through the corners. You've got tons of grip, in a similar way to the Nissan Nismo, but without quite as high a top speed. So overall, if you do decide to use this tune, I hope you have a ton of fun with it. Of course, win plenty of races, not just at Le Mans, but certainly on more technical circuits as well. That's where the car really comes into its own. And under those circumstances, you can take on much more powerful cars very successfully. But of course, you can click here on screen to see more of my Le Mans prototype setups, as well as, of course, plenty of others too. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.